chime in. We want to hear from you all, especially that you're doing the work, you know the work. So we do want to hear from you as well.
Yeah, so we're just, as we were meeting with our SWAVO steering committee, we kind of talked a lot about what are some topics, things like that, that we can touch on. And sorry, I'm just gonna move our transcription.
Very distracting.
Yeah. It's mostly so we know sound, but they can hear us, so. But we wanted to talk a lot about, like, we've had collaboration be one of the topics, that working with each other and how to collaborate and working within our confidentiality was a topic. And it's been kind of interesting since we kind of started the SWAVO agenda in July, and we're working on it, that in a lot of the spaces that Beatrice and I have been in different state agency meetings or local meeting, county, local, collaboration has been also a topic, and warm handoffs and how to collaborate has been a topic in those settings as well. So we're like, oh, we're on par with what people, our SWAVO steering committee was already ahead of the game of what was needed. So, but we wanted to bring in some ethics as well with collaboration. We really do want to try to touch on different parts of the ethical considerations. So that's the other handout that you guys would have. This one is, there's a lot of different ones that you can reference. This one, that's the other handout. So you have this as a handout. And then there's another one back there, if you didn't get it, that goes through victim advocate ethics. Wow. That's from the National Credentialing Advocate Program. That's a national one. So, okay.
So all this information, a lot of it came from OVC TAC. So if you don't know about that website, OVC TTAC, best website ever. There's so many trainings on there. And one of them was on collaboration and ethical advocacy. So I just got to give the kudos, the credit to our federal agencies where they're having these conversations and holding these spaces for training. And the ethical guidelines they were providing that we'll be covering today in our conversation will be the scope of services, direct services, and coordinating within the community, and then also administration and evaluation. We'll touch on a lot of that a little bit later. But the theme of this conversation is not necessarily the victim and like client relationship. This is more as an agency, as an advocate, those ethical practices and considerations and guidelines that really make a victim advocate. And again, these have come from the national credentialing agencies for victim advocates that we wanted to make sure we were following along.
Okay. So within the scope of services, these are some of the guidelines that they have. So following the law, and I think that a lot of times with community-based, I worked as a community-based advocate as well as a system-based. And so sometimes you're like, oh, I don't need to know criminal because I'm community-based, but it actually does really help you as a community-based advocate to know the criminal laws so that you may understand, like, okay, they're telling me the officer made this arrest or did this action. I don't really understand why, or we're maybe questioning what they're doing. And so understanding the code and the laws that govern what the officer and the victim advocate can do can really help you in guiding the victim to either get connected with a system-based advocate or to understand and empower them to connect with that system. And then also knowing your own confidentiality statute. So it is hyperlinked, and we will add the PowerPoint to the presentation so you can go there. If you're not familiar with the confidentiality statute, let's see if it will open. I don't know if it shows them. I can't tell if it shows them online, but okay. So this is where you can find that. This outlines what a victim advocate's confidentiality it can be, what a criminal justice advocate confidentiality is, as well as what their communication is with the prosecutor. So just being aware that that is there. So really understanding what your different confidentiality. I heard Jaden and Haley kind of joking about, like, we can either deny, we can't deny or confirm this person's here. And sometimes officers are like, why do they have to always say that to me? And it's like, it's for that victim's safety. It's for, we don't know that you really are an officer that's on the phone. You could be the perpetrator pretending to be an officer, or things like that, that it is for that safety of the victim. So when we understand each other's confidentiality, it really helps us to be able to create an MOU or a collaborative effort to best be successful in working with the victim and working within those bounds of our confidentiality. And then always, it's important to know your federal and funding guidelines. Our team on the back two tables really do have to delve into code and federal DOJ guidelines and the CFR and all of these things that make sure that what we're asking you guys to do on your grants is in line and compliance with what we are required to for federal. And there are very specific confidentiality guidelines within your federal funding. VAWA has very specific confidentiality that VOCA also mirrors, which is very similar to what our confidentiality pretty much mirrors what's in the statute now as well, but being aware of those different things. And then understanding your advocacy roles, we want to identify what your own advocacy role is, understand your limits and your purpose, and then understand the community and the system-based advocacy roles. So I think a lot of times we want to be the one that can like help and do everything for that survivor or for that victim. We want to be that one stop, but sometimes that's oftentimes not necessarily going to be the best thing for them. It's helpful for them to actually have more people in their corner. It's helpful for them to have a confidential advocate that is a community-based advocate that they can connect with and get in groups, support groups, or they could get housing assistance. They could have different resources through that. And then to connect if there is going to be a criminal case, to connect with the system base, be able to have that criminal justice advocacy piece there. And so you have more people in that victim's corner. Also, the victim doesn't feel like, oh, I can only talk to Beatrice. She's the only person that's safe for me to talk to. They now have multiple safe people to talk to. But we're understanding what your roles are so that you can collaborate and say, hey, this is beyond my capacity, but this person can do this. Let's go ahead and have you connect with this advocate. Go ahead.
I just want to add, similar to what Hope was saying, right? Creating those healthy boundaries for ourselves, for our clients, having those boundaries will really just help our clients be able to know that there's a team behind them, right? Like, and what if I'm not available because I want to have my life too, right? We want to use our PTO. There's going to be family emergency. There's going to be other circumstances. So it's really nice when you are able to communicate with them. Hey, there's this team behind you. So that way they know where to reach out to as well if you're not available too. Just wanted to add that little part there too.
Yeah, no, you're good. And then we want to inform about services. It's helpful to know, like, does that agency have a cost associated with it? Is it on a sliding scale? Kind of like Hope was saying, being aware of maybe what therapy agencies, what insurance they take. If they've already kind of worked with crime victims reparations, we have a contract with them, so we can do that as well. And they can work with our office to help pay for that, but also just being aware. Even like we had this morning, Utah Legal Services, being aware that some other civil law services could be on a sliding scale. So it's kind of our job to educate ourselves on what's available out there. And then also to let other people know what your services are. So educating other people, the people that you're collaborating with, the people that the victim's going to be interfacing with, letting them know that so they know what your services are as well. And we want to know what each type of service is provided and how to access those. So that's something that maybe if you feel like your website's not as up to date and doesn't have everything on there, getting with your team and updating your website, making those cold calls and reaching out to the agencies that are in your region and saying, hey, what does it look like to have a victim come in and do get connected to your resources, right? What does workforce services process look like? What does this look like? Getting yourself informed about what services and then informing others. And then with professional conduct, it is important to know the ethical standards. So the two that advocates should be referencing and utilizing is the NCAP one that we gave you guys the copy for, as well as UOVC TTAC has ethical standards that they're very similar to the NCAP ones, but those two are very focused on what a victim advocate's role is, and those are ethical standards for those. But in that ethical standard is a specific one on collaboration and coordination that we should be collaborating and coordinating with our partners to best serve victims. And then last on the scope of services is professional competency. And it was kind of funny, Beatrice and I went back on this because I was like, oh, competency, I feel like has such a negative connotation with it. And I really did like the definition that OVC TTAC had with competency, that it really is, that it's the knowledge, attitude, and skills of that victim advocate. And so victim assistance is growing field. So it's really important to continue to learn. You guys are already doing a good step. You're here today, getting training, getting connected to training. And so with that, we want to make sure that we're up to date on what's the newest research on best practices for our warm handoff. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about. Our best practices for notification of court. What are, there's a lot of trauma informed practices and things like that as well.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So I here too. Sorry, I like to have the two visuals, so I don't have to keep like turning my head. Elements again of direct services. These are not like me to victim, right? This is as an agency, as an advocate, as a whole, things to consider. Obviously, kind of the biggest ones, respecting the civil rights. We all should know the Utah Crime Victim Bill of Rights. So that way we're able to educate and empower our victims or clients. And I apologize, I use victim because I was a system-based advocate. When I'm speaking to my prosecutors and my police officers, that's the verbiage we use. So I just want to preface it. I apologize. Sometimes I'll use client as well from when I was at the clinic. So I just tend to like mix around those words, but overall we're dealing with a victim of a crime. Knowing and understanding those civil rights really goes a long way, because one of the rights for a victim is understanding their role in the criminal justice system. And if we don't know what their role is in the criminal justice system, it's gonna be really hard to let them know what their role is in the criminal justice system. And it can feel really frustrating when you're navigating a system that you're not really sure where to go, and all of a sudden your guide is not knowing where to go, right? So really empowering ourselves with this education, with this knowledge, and then providing that language access that is also like part of the right. But in itself, like language access goes a long way in ensuring that all victims have that equitable access to services. A victim of crime, as we know, does not have a preference. It can happen to anyone and everyone. So we really want to make sure that we're ensuring that as an agency as a whole, there is language access, and our federal guidelines for VOCA, VAWA, and even our now state, since we follow the federal regulations, we have to have that language access plan. So your agency should have one, know it. It's one of those things that sometimes we don't, until you have to utilize it, you're like, oh, great. How do I use this language line, right? But having that knowledge beforehand can go a long way, so that way you can help prepare for it. But also when that moment happens, it's more of a streamlined services. There's not a gap of services. Sometimes like with Spanish, I'm a Spanish speaker, so it's easy to provide that language access. But I'm not an interpreter. I'm not a certified interpreter. I don't know how to interpret in the way that needs to be done. So I have to stay in my lane. I have to know that I have to collaborate with my interpreter, so that way they can come in and provide that interpretation that's needed. But also, I'm, again, ensuring that language access is happening and that they're understanding their role in this process. And that's going to help protect the victim's interests, right? As advocates, we're advocating for our clients' needs, whatever it may be, but really how can we make sure we're doing that? And some of these pillars just really all work together. We want to honor their voice throughout the system. We want to hear them out. I love some of those questions that they said, utilizing those open-ended questions and comments, so that way we can facilitate more of a conversation, and we're hearing our client, right? We want to know what their needs really are, so that way we can help protect their interests where we can as advocates. And we got to stay in our lane, right? Like if I'm in a system base, when I was working with my prosecutors at West Valley, I was able to let them know, hey, I have this recommendation from this victim. This is what's going on in this case. We're almost humanizing the case. We're reminding the system there's a literal person that is being affected. It's not just a defendant that's being affected. we're showing them that other side, and we're able to honor that voice throughout there. And then, abiding by the confidentiality, that really goes back to that previous slide that Vicky was mentioning, knowing where those confidentialities lay. I know that if I'm going to a community-based advocate, most likely at a shelter or crisis center, they're going to have that confidentiality, and I love it, right? I want my client to know that they can go somewhere safe where they can have a private conversation that's not just going to get funneled back to prosecutors, which anything that's part of evidence has to be given back to defense attorneys, right? So the defendant, maybe the abuser. So it's really helpful in those safety plans as well to know your partners where they can have that space. So that way the victim or the client, your survivor, is able to know how to access these services and can make the choice as to where they want to navigate those conversations. And then being that non-judgmental space, being a safe space, right? We got to keep our own opinions to ourselves. I loved what Southwest was saying as well, where it's like, oh, we want them to move forward, but they're still in the stages of change, and we're just there to be that support and guide them and show them like there's this road, right? There's this lane over here, there's that one. I'm going to support you no matter what, wherever you go, especially for those with domestic violence incidences, right? That can be really hard when you are dealing with those things, when there's so many barriers, there's so many ups and downs and wanting to navigate that. So just letting them know that you're here really just goes a long way. One of my favorite parts when I was at West Valley was just being able to say, hey, even like if this case goes away, or if you don't want to participate in the case, whatever it may be, I just want you to know that you can call me. I'm here for you. I'm here to connect you to resource. I'm just a 211 essentially. And whatever you need, just let me know, and I'm happy to connect you to whatever services. And there's also South Valley Services, there's the YWCA. I'm from Salt Lake County, if you can't tell. So I'm gonna let them know what the local confidential community shelters are as well, so they can access services outside of the system. The system sometimes, they may want to participate, they may not, right? But that's where we provide that non-judgmental guidance while we're speaking with them. And so that way they can have that self-determination. It's not up to us whether or not they're going to leave an abusive situation. It's not up to us to make changes in their life, right? They have that autonomy. They are adults. We want to honor their adulthood too, but we really want to honor the fact that they know what their situation is, and that ultimately they may know what's best for them, and it may not look like what we think is best for them. Like I might be like, no, you gotta go to shelter, but they might be like, no, I don't want to go to shelter. That's okay. I want to stay in my own home. I feel safe here. I got my big bath over here, the nice shower. Like I want to respect that. I want to honor the fact that that might not be the place that they feel comfortable or safe, but then I can also be like, oh, okay, well, how can we make this a safe place, right? If you're wanting to stay home, and maybe the suspect's at large or they were booked in a jail, how can we make sure that we're safe in this situation? How can I support you in your safety? How can I make sure that our agency is here for you, backing you up with whatever may come up? And really honoring that space so that they can know where to go. And that's where educating them on the victim bill of rights, educating them on the fact that there is a confidential advocate, educating them that there is a system-based advocate that has the ear of the prosecutor, or there is a police advocate that knows how to get a hold of the detective or lieutenant, whatever it may be in their case issues, that there is an advocate for it. And it's so incredible that our system keeps growing and the advocate world keeps growing, because 8 years ago it looked a lot different in some ways, but it's also that progressive wheel and how we can continue to make sure that we're honoring the clients and the individuals that we serve. And that just goes with confidentiality. You'll hear us talk a lot about confidentiality. It's one of the ethics, but also it's just a good reminder because every agency is going to have different limits. If you're in system-based, as you already know, like your limitations are different because you have to talk to the prosecutor. You have to be able to talk within the system, so your confidentiality looks very different. And making sure that the victim knows that, hey, if you're telling me certain things about your case, I got to talk to my prosecutor, I got to tell the police officer about this, because there may be some things that they may not feel comfortable, they don't want it to go into the system, and that's that self-determination. They get to choose where they participate, and for me, I'm biased, right? I'm gonna be like, no, tell us everything. We want to make sure we charge them with everything possible, or X, Y, Z, but really, what's gonna be best for them? What energy do they have to be able to put into the system as well? What energy can they put into navigating all of these services? What if they don't even have a car? So then accessing additional services is gonna be a little bit more difficult too. So we wanna make sure we're honoring them and checking in where they might need support. So that way we can be there to guide them and let them know and educate them to what options are available and what may be best for them.
And just the last thing on that confidentiality too, is just really making sure you have a policy and procedure in place for the security of the data that you may have for the victim, your case notes, your notes, things like that. And knowing if you are system-based, that your case notes are subpoenable, but those that maybe have client files, that, you know, if you work from home part of the time and you work in the office part of the time, your client files aren't just in your drawer at home, or family members could access or things like that, just making sure that that information, we're respecting that victim by keeping that data confidential and in a safe place, essentially. Okay, so kind of continue on, and a lot of these, they do really intermix. So I think repetition is good, though. Sometimes we need that, like, kind of, all it overlaps into this, and so if it feels a little repetitive, some of these, they do really coordinate and collaborate together, so it works that way. We had some really good ideas for boundaries on our earlier presentation, but really understanding and educate client on your agency boundaries and your individual limits. If your agency doesn't have 24/7 services, then that's okay. That's a boundary that you can set, that I'm not available 24/7, but here's a crisis line that is. Here is a 24/7 line. Here's Link line. Here's UCASA for sexual assault. Here's human trafficking line that are 24/7. So if you don't offer those 24/7, get them connected to maybe something that does, and keep that boundary. Don't be responding to their inquiry at 11 p.m. When your office hours are 8 to 5, those kinds of things. And sometimes I fall into that I'm like checking emails as I'm going to bed, because it's like, oh, I'm gonna have 90 in the morning. I might as well get some of them through, and just having those boundaries for yourself is good. And then the referring to vetted and appropriate agencies, that's where those collaborative partnerships do come into play. Because if you're gonna you're like, okay, why don't you go to this food bank, and you haven't checked in a while, and maybe that food bank has moved and it's no longer at that location, it's at a different location or something like that. And so making sure we're keeping up to date and vetting our resources that we're giving victims, that we're not just handing them a list of things that we may or may not know whether they're good resources or not. And then this kind of goes along with the civil rights, but non-discriminatory. You want to make sure that you're aware of what a protected class is, who is a protected class, and make sure that we're abiding by the civil rights laws that are in place. If you do receive any grant funding, state funding through our office, or federal grant funding, you do have to go through a civil rights law training, right, essentially. So being aware of what those protected classes are. And then really understanding that the victim is unique and deserves equitable access to services. So even, for example, our office, we are grandfathered in because we're an old office, but our office isn't the best ADA accessible. They can get into our main entrance. We do have a button that does give them access to call up, so we know that they're there, and then we have someone come out. But if someone is trying to get up our ramp, that thing is a beast. So we have this ramp that goes to our parking lot, but someone that's in a non-electric wheelchair is probably not going to get up to that. So that's why we've made those accommodations we have in our building, so that we can at least still try to make sure our services are accessible. But if we know a client that's coming in to meet with us at our office, and we know that they're in a wheelchair, we're going to make sure we're kind of down there and ready for them before they even need to ring our bell, type thing. But just being aware of maybe if that resource that is available, but they don't have an entrance for a wheelchair or something like that, being aware of those, asking those questions when you make the cold calls to those agencies, asking them what their ADA accessibility is. And then we want to support colleagues. I loved, Lisa, that you had made the comment that you guys have had some really heavy, hard cases, but your colleagues in the county have really helped you. And I think really know when you have reached your limits and ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. If you're the only advocate in your entire agency, reach out to the advocates that are maybe in the surrounding agencies, or reach out to Beatrice or I. We're happy to maybe help debrief. You don't have to give us any personal identifying information about the case, but maybe you just need to debrief and process the case because you maybe don't have someone that you can. And then be mindful of your colleagues' needs, as well as be willing to jump in and help. Being aware, like, oh, I see that they're just like, look like are so overwhelmed. Like even this morning, Dell's like, I can see from your own energy from clear across the room that you're stressed. What can I do? And I was like, thank you. Can you do this? And so just kind of being aware, it's like we do with our clients. We're judging the climate. We're judging whether they're walking in with that stormy weather today, or they're walking in with the sunny weather. And we're going to be aware of those and see how we can be helpful in adjusting that. We guys do such hard, exhausting work a lot of the time. So we want to make sure we're buoying each other up when we can. Avoid conflicts of interest. And I know this one can be really difficult in rural areas. I think, Misty, we talked about, like when you're in our academy, that you're like, it's really hard because everybody knows everybody in our small town. And so it's harder to conflict cases out when you're in that really small town. But maybe if it is like a direct family member, that we call a sister agency in to help with that. Be mindful of those conflicts that arise, and maybe have a plan for that, especially if you are in a really rural area, that you're like, okay, if I have this scenario, then I have A, B, and C of who people I can call and connect with them with when it's a conflict of interest for me. And then understanding your own role. And then the terminate appropriately. We were like struggling with this wording too. We're like, because in my word, like terminate is like death, but it's not what this means. So I was like, we're terminating someone. Okay. Really, this is like, instead of just kind of leaving a victim hanging, that you just like stop contacting them. Like if your case is over. So if you're a criminal justice advocate and now the case has gone to the Board of Pardons and they're going to be in prison, or they've pled and they're going to be on probation, letting them know that like they can still access your services, they could still call you if they have questions, but that you may not be calling them as frequently, letting them know, hey, this, or if you are in a shelter, and it does, I worked in a shelter, I was a weekend shelter manager, and I had to evict a client, right? Essentially that was being aggressive towards other clients, had brought in alcohol, things like that. I had to do an eviction process, essentially for evicting her out of the shelter, and said, we are no longer can have you in our shelter. We have to end these services. So sometimes it can be that really abrupt that you're terminating that, but you may just have that you need to at least let them know the process, so they don't kind of feel like, oh, I just haven't heard from Holly in like 5 months. Why haven't I, kind of thing, or just one of those types of things of making sure they understand what your role is, what your limitations are, and that say, hey, I'm not probably going to call you and give you these check-ins because the case is now over, but you're welcome to call me if you have questions, that kind of thing. So that's what that means. Any questions on the 10 elements of direct services, or any comments? I know it's a tail end. Everybody wants to take a nap, but stay with us.
Yes, please. As you saw, like with the breakout session, we got into our counties, our groups, our regions, and the goal is so that we can start collaborating with our community. It's been really fun. Like Vicki mentioned, I've been in different spaces and they're all talking about collaboration. They're all trying to figure out how, even within the criminal justice system, they can collaborate a little bit more and have more communication, especially across jurisdictions, especially for juvenile cases. So it's really fun to know that as a whole, we're all talking about it, and it's really exciting to see all of you that have those collaboration efforts, right? Like if you're in a police agency, you're collaborating with police officers, you're collaborating with that system. If you're at a shelter, you're most likely collaborating with a lot of community partners too. So I just want to honor you. I see you, and we see the collaboration efforts that you already have, and I just want to I see you and I don't want to hype you up, okay? But to talk a little bit more about collaboration, because we can't say, hey, everyone, y'all need to collaborate and then not tell you how, right? I really in all of this, reading about the whys was really empowering, especially seeing the ethics behind the why. The collaboration with community was an ethic, not only for an ethic guidelines, but a program standard, a competency standard as well and guideline. And it really just came down to providing the best services for a victim. And also within our own agencies, right? Like respecting your colleagues, knowing that you are an agency as a whole, you're kind of all in it together. We're all experiencing different things and we're all at a different window of tolerances as well too that we spoke about. So we want to make sure we're seeing them and we're coordinating them with our colleagues as well. Sharing the knowledge. So today we tried for our CAP advocate. Thank you for sharing your personal knowledge of the program so that way we could all learn a little bit more to what the CAP program is. But sharing the knowledge goes a long way because now all of us as advocates, now we know a little bit more about Timpanogos Legal Clinic's efforts for the certified program. And now we also know hopefully who's in your region. But now we get to see how we can cross train too. We can see how if you're in a police agency, I know we have another system-based agency up north where they're going around with their community-based advocates and them as a system-based advocates, and they're presenting to their police officers about the LAP protocol, their services, and I'm like, wow, how amazing. Like, that is so exciting that you guys are able to do that, and knowing your community needs is really vital because some communities, like in West Valley, that's a lot of coordination we got to figure out. So it's knowing who you're working with, know your audience and know who your partners are. So that way when you can share that knowledge. If you're working a lot with, I'm thinking like Suncrest Counseling for some reason. If you're working a lot with them, like check in with them. Hey, are you aware of what we do? Can we learn more about your agency? Let's do a cross training. So now Suncrest Counseling can also refer victims of crime to your agency if that's appropriate. Or now you know a little bit more about what the counseling agency does too. So that way when you're referring a client, you're able to really give them accurate information. And this can go in formal or informal trainings. A lot of fun part when I worked with my detectives was just like, oh, really? Well, there's this criminal code. I remember when this law happened because of the pandemic. And I'm pretty sure that a defendant, if they're on WebEx, like that counts as service. So let's figure this out. It was a whole thing for me at West Valley, but it was a lot of informal training and not really I wanted to respect their space and knowing that they're law enforcement, they know what they're doing. And I want to give them the space that I know that they know what they're doing. But I also want to give them some additional knowledge of maybe, hey, there's this that may have passed, or, oh, I've been working with this client and this is all that they've been dealing with and some hardships. She wasn't able to answer your phone because the defendant actually took the phone and broke it during the criminal event, or they had to change their number for safety. That's a lot of informal training that happens because we're providing that trauma-informed information by letting them know this other piece. And then being able to collaborate in those efforts with your police agency, that is already a collaboration with your patrol, and then having that collaboration with your detectives as well. So that way, if there is any case follow-up, or if you want to give case information, maybe there's a collaboration there that it can be made. So just start really just thinking about your own agency, what y'all are doing, and where maybe you can grow these collaboration efforts a little bit more. Because as we know, victim services is just an ongoing wheel. Like, we just got to keep figuring out how to best serve our clients and our community. And then improves the system, right? We're constantly working on this improvement. And to improve the system, we just have to be mindful of those best practices and updating those. Best practices, research comes up. I remember when I started as an advocate, I was still in college. So I was I remember this stages of change, the pre-operational changes and all of that fun stuff. And being able to know the knowledge while I started as an advocate was really helpful for me. But now there's different best practices. Like, there's more knowledge. There's so much research that's constantly happening. So being an advocate that looks out for that, right? Or as an organization, how can you find additional information, and maybe where can you start that conversation? Maybe you see a gap in your own community or in your own agency, like, oh yeah, we haven't been able to figure this out, or this gap of service. Start that conversation within yourself, and then that's where you can start learning and starting those collaboration efforts too with your supervisor, if you're on that level, your other community partners, or even within your agency. How can you collaborate more? Like, as an advocate, one of those things I was like, I wish I would have done a little bit better. The other advocates in my agency did really great was collaborate with the records department. to get a police report. Like that was just a disconnect that I had, where I was like, oh yeah, you gotta fill out this form, where there's, as an advocate, I can also talk to records, we can make sure this is happening a little bit quicker. So they're not waiting the full 10 days, or CVR, you talk to victims of crime might need a police report. Maybe you're a victim advocate in a space that can talk to the records department to educate them to why the Utah Office of Victims of Crime will want that police report, and why that's gonna be helpful, and why they can release it to a government agency, right? So those are those collaborations that we're thinking about. So that way, when we are doing the more handoffs, we're understanding that system. We know where to go. I can say, hey, you can talk to Jill at Records. She's gonna have you fill out this form, and this is the process, what's gonna look like. I'm happy to meet with you in the police lobby at 9 o'clock, if that's a time that works best for you. Obviously, ask them what time works best for them. Maybe you can give them a time, but I would probably ask them first. But hey, let's meet at 9 o'clock, and we'll both meet at the police lobby, and we can both talk to Jill about getting your police report. And maybe once I tell Jill that my clients hear what they need, I'm like, okay, is there anything else I can help you out with? Maybe I have capacity to stay with the victim while they fill that form out and get their police report, but maybe I don't, right? Like, I understand that a lot of you are probably triaging a lot of cases. So doing that warm handoff just gives that victim that sense of safety and trust, because now they know who Jill is. They have a name that they know that they can count on, and they can tie it back to you as well, where there's also another level of accountability where you can check in. Hey, how did that go? How were you able to access that police report? Okay. Were you missing anything? And it's like, yeah, Beatrice, you didn't tell me to bring my ID. Oh, okay. Like, that's on me. I forgot to tell you you need an ID. I should probably know the process to obtaining a police report, so this collaboration can happen. And so understanding where and how, but then also being willing to create the referral process between agencies too. And the willingness, the trust, just knowing that there's a space for that conversation and being willing to see where that can happen. But that's where it comes a lot of knowing your own agency and knowing what you need and what struggles might come up too. But that's the next slide that I'm jumping to. And that's.
You're good. Okay. So just to kind of continue on with the collaboration strategy is ask those questions. Who are the stakeholders? I would challenge you guys after this training to maybe, even if it's tomorrow, but you could even do it while I'm talking, is think of 5 services that maybe you're like, I don't know that many therapy agencies, or maybe I don't really understand what agencies could help a victim get food or could help a victim get a job. Like, list 5 things of services that you've, like, do I know who that is? Do I actually know the new recent people that are working at that agency? And reach out to them, ask the questions. Who are the stakeholders? What does the organization do? We are so fortunate with the internet that we can look up a lot of information, but sometimes doing that actual personal call and getting to know the people is really helpful as well. And what can you provide? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And then asking, I think this is the biggest and most important thing, is asking the victim how they would like to receive the information on resources. I think a lot of times we just assume they want that big packet of information, and sometimes they really, really don't. They really are just like, I can't, that overwhelms me. That's giving me a lot of anxiety. I see 10 different forms and pamphlets and brochures in there, and I can't handle that. And so maybe having that we have our business card, and our business card has a QR code. Our business cards now have the QR code to our website on the back of it. Maybe we have a QR code on our business card that gives them access to our website and lets them know where our services are, right? And sometimes giving it in multiple ways, right? So we can have that business card has that QR code. We can have a hard copy. We can have that we're going to email it to them, that we're going to text them some information, really asking them what's their best way of communicating and providing it in that way. And then usually providing those resources more than once to them. We want to develop a plan, create a comprehensive plan that sorry, I feel like my neck is going that way. That includes that vision, a mission, goals, strategies, and confidentiality limits. This is a guide that all stakeholders have agreed on. So really having those spaces, if your area doesn't have maybe a sexual assault response team, or doesn't have a coalition, or doesn't have a community coordinated response team, seeking out why they don't and looking at if we can start a SART or start a coalition and have those opportunities so that we can really improve the process, right? Essentially working on like, what's a really good information and release, what do we have, what this agency's information release looks like, what does ours look like, how can we bridge that gap? And then creating those protocols, we want to implement a plan with the communication protocol. What are the expectations for communication and language access? So making sure we are aware of our own language access plan, but also what the other agency's language access looks like. And then how will those referrals be done? Is it best, you know, for our office, we used to always have like everything you needed to fax to us, and now it can be email, and we've updated, and now we have an online application and things like that. And so being aware of how you can access the information and how you can follow up. And what will be done for unsuccessful referrals. So maybe if we gave kind of referral and the victim or the client came back to us and was like, that was awful. I went with that person or this agency and it didn't go well, or there was no one answered. One of the things that we actually do for our academy that we've enjoyed doing is we do a group project. I know everyone's like, oh, group projects, but we do it on underserved population. And so it's been actually interesting because they're challenged to then find a resource that serves that underserved population. And this last time they came back and they're like, we called multiple times, we sent an email to someone and we did this, and like, we didn't hear back. So I don't know if I would actually give this resource that we were like researching. And I was like, but that's really useful for you to know that like maybe their best way to contact them is an online form or different things like that. So if we don't know how to access it and we're giving it to the victim, we may be setting them up for failure. And then we want to train your staff and agency or you're collaborating. This is where you can have trainings, opportunities, or even just small 20-minute trainings at like SARTs or things like that, so that everyone's receiving the same base information and can be on the same page, doing that cross training that we mentioned before. And then in management and evaluation, we want to make sure that we're conducting our own regular performance evaluations with each other, right? How did that look? Was it when I, called and we set up an appointment for the victim? Did that go okay? Was that okay how we handled that warm handoff? Doing that open communication, right, essentially. And we want to check with staff and clients on how things are working and look at how we can efficiently manage the daily operations and resources so the process can go smoothly. I know that a lot of times evaluations can feel like really overwhelming or really impersonal, but there's so many ways that you can get feedback from. It can be a simple text message of like, hey, how are you? Were you able to connect with A, B, and C resource I gave you? Checking in and doing those small resources, or checking in and doing that evaluation. It doesn't have to be a formal written evaluation. There's so many ways. And then I think the last thing of really looking at how our warm handoff is your agency getting victim participation? We want to actually listen to the victim first, have them be on your board, have a survivor be on your board if you're a nonprofit, things like that, so that we know that, is this going to work for a trauma brain, right? Is this referral, this process actually working well for someone that has been victimized? And we want to listen to the victim if it may be hard to hear that like that referral just really backfired. You'd be like, oh man, I thought I sent you to a great resource, but let's maybe brainstorm and look at how can we problem solve this and look at how we can make sure that you're connected the way you should be.
Challenges. This training again, it was on OVC TAC and it was really cool. But it would talk about a challenge and then gives us a fix. Right? Sometimes there's a lack of shared vision or mission. So that's a really big part of creating that warm handoff or even starting a collaboration, is know what your goal is. What is your goal when you are collaborating with this agency? What are you hoping to get out of it? But also, what are you giving as well? Knowing that this is a two-way street, right? It takes two to tango. So understanding what the expectations are on both ends and having that clear communication, that does come with some level of trust too, being willing to be vulnerable as an agency to say, oh yeah, we need this, or we're struggling with this. How can we collaborate together? And hopefully that other agency also is being willing to say, hey, this is how we can bridge this gap. maybe it's a collaboration that might not work too. Maybe you guys come together, we're trying to figure out a shared vision, but the shared visions are different, and that's okay. How can we compromise? How can we figure out how to make these conversations happen? And then hopefully finding a solution, but then also the lack of agreement over the problem or issue. So remember the whys. Why are we even collaborating, right? Like if this isn't working right now, or sometimes hiccups come up, and that's normal. We're all humans, and this field that we work on is really hard and taxing on ourselves too. But so being willing to check in on the whys. Okay, this isn't working, but why did we create this collaboration? How can we go back and kind of review why this isn't working? Like, why is this hiccup happening? And when you have that collaboration and you have stakeholders together, you're able to come together and have this conversation together. Hey, I've had a couple of victims call and they're not getting called back, or I tried to do this referral and I haven't heard back. Just wanted to check in. Is so-and-so still there? Maybe their staff changed, maybe their services change, or maybe they're going through a whole structural change that may have not been communicated that we need to check in on. And that's where it really helps to have that shared vision, because you can continue to go back on it and reference it. Anytime issues arise, using that almost as like your guide, right? Like this is what I'm going to keep and hold to. How can we come back and make sure that the shared vision is actually happening? And then the lack of success, that can feel really hard when there's all this, we're doing all this work to collaborate and we may not be seeing the success, but check in, right? Review again the why. Maybe there's a lack of diversity among the program as well. Maybe there's, and not just like people diversity, maybe we need a counselor, maybe we need a police officer, maybe we need the probation agency. Really try to make sure that you have the right people at the table to help out with this collaboration. So for me, I'm not a supervisor. So before I start a collaboration, I talk to my supervisor, right? Because I want to make sure my supervisor and I have a shared vision, an approved vision, to start a collaboration with another agency. So that way there's a whole support. It isn't just something that like Bree and I, we're going to collaborate, and it can be an informal collaboration, sure, but we can grow a collaboration so much more when it is formal. And now I'm talking to Bree's supervisor's talking to my supervisor, and now we're all coming together at a table and having a discussion to how we can create a collaboration, and maybe that warm handoff process, especially to best serve our clients, to be victim-centered, to be trauma-informed. And then a lot of other issues that might come up is territorialism, and that comes with concerns about duplication of services. Grants allow duplication of services. They want, we want to make sure that services are provided to all. So that's just, and now trauma brain, right? That reptile brain kicks in. They're only going to be focused on safety. They're not going to be focused, oh, have I filled out that CVR form? Maybe I filled out that CVR form. That kind of looks familiar. I don't know. A lot of times I'm like, hey, I may be a broken record, but I just want to check in on this. So just being able to have those conversations with your other agencies to how to best deliver those services. And really, again, focus on if these conflicts are happening, refocus. Let's check in on the why, but our whys is really being victim-centered and trauma-informed and making sure that we're serving victims of crime, right? So just coming back to that shared vision will help out when we are dealing with these things, because that way it's reminding us, okay, maybe this phone call didn't work, but the next one, right? Let's talk to this partner agency and we can figure out how we can better fix this and fill in that gap. And maybe it is just a lack of understanding of victim trauma or understanding the Crime Victim Bill of Rights. And that's where those informal or formal trainings can happen, where you as an agency can say, hey, let's do cross training. Let me learn what you're doing and I will teach you what I'm doing. And in there, we can talk about trauma. We can talk about being victim-centered. We can talk about the complexities of being a victim of a crime, of domestic violence or sexual violence or child abuse. There's so many different components that may be happening there. So coming back together will really help out in being able to have these conversations. So providing trainings in our SARTs, or coalitions, meetings. So UOVC as well, like part of it came my I didn't say that, our training.
job, yeah.
Yes, our title, our program, the training and outreach program, we're focusing on training right around here too. But if you're finding that your agency or your collaboration agency is saying, oh, what is being a trauma-informed organization? Y'all are already doing so much work. I hope that you know that we can come in and support you and your agency in providing that training. So that way you can be a guest. You don't have to do that additional work and can focus on your role. And we can be that third party that comes in and say, oh, this is a trauma-informed organization, or this is the Crime Victim Bill of Rights. This is what victim services is as a whole. Those little topics can really go a long way. Because sometimes, again, it might just be a lack of understanding that's happening there. And this just, again, is ensuring that all of those that are in a decision-making position are on the same page to be able to continue to move forward in that partnership.
And we do know a lot of people, so if there's a topic that you're like, our agency really needs this, then
Yeah,
I know a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me, so.
we will definitely find someone.
Some things can be changing management, so you've had now a new supervisor, you've had staff change. I know that in the victim services world, it is a lot of turnover, or maybe it's a new supervisor, so the way you're doing services has changed, and so making sure that you can ask and be like, what's our new vision, or what are we looking at, what services, lack of resources. I was, chatting with advocates and on the break and just talking about like, there's just never enough beds for shelter, right? We're always like, their shelters are full, we can't get them in. And we know that's a resource. So what are some other ways we can look around that? That was always a hard one. Like hotel vouchers aren't always going to be the best. Maybe how else can we look at this? And how can we look at those resources? What are some other avenues? And so if there isn't enough funding, we know funding cuts happen, and we feel those funding cuts whenever they do happen as well. And so finding ways around those limited resources. I've been surprised that just even as Beatrice and I are looking at outreach, we're reaching out to a lot of underserved population kind of agencies. And just like the refuge centers that are in the different areas, I've been so like amazed at the amount of services that they have in so many languages. They have direct therapists that speak like these very different dialects. So if you have a population of refugees that you're working with, or a victim that's a refugee, get them connected. There's refugee centers throughout the state. That's just one that I was like, that I wish I would have known this resource as a system-based advocate, that they had so many languages and being able to help with housing and things like that. And then making sure that we give, it can be hard sometimes to give ourselves kudos or letting people know our success, letting our chief or maybe our board or our county commission know when we have had success. We love getting anecdotal information as well, even for grant reports and things like that, of what's going well and what you were able to accomplish. And so I think that can be really important. Just the slide that was before these two, that's the front page. So that collaboration strategy is on the front. And then we're gonna just end on the handout that is here on this side of the handout on the warm handout process. And I'm gonna let Lee take it away.
Throughout this presentation we did, as I think you guys can see, we kind of covered some of these topics. So again, identify your stakeholders, know your community members, who do you want at the table, but also who needs to be at the table, right? Then you're developing that one handout. When you're at the table together, you have a shared vision. Now, how do we want to approach this? How do we really realistically can make this happen? Because maybe I'm a one-man band, right? I can't take on 50 referrals in one day. So being willing to have that conversation. Okay, I'm just one person, or I have two teams right here. This is what my capacity will be. I can take about 20 referrals from you in a week. Or maybe less, maybe more. Check your own capacity, and it's okay. Collaborations just comes from creating something, but we just want to help identify those gaps. Because if there's a need for services and you guys are itemizing and having tangible evidence of it, you're able to talk to your commission, you're able to talk to your city councils, you're able to talk to those spaces that might be able to help out with funding. Especially like, again, the whole state as itself is talking about collaboration efforts, but collaboration there might be some funding behind it, right? So being willing to take on that information and Document it will go a long way. But then also when you create that warm handoff process, that's gonna be your guide. Another, like you have your mission and then you have your protocols all written down. This is so that you and I have the same understanding, right? If we just speak about it and put it in the air, it's gonna be hard. I'm not gonna remember very well. But maybe that referral process isn't going as smoothly as possible. Let's look back at the protocol. What warm handoff, what was our protocol? Where is this going wrong? How can we adjust and how can we maybe fix this? And then the next part,
Sorry,
oh, you're good.
want to go back to that?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I jumped in.
No, it's okay. This just helps my brain know where I'm going.
You're good.
Then it's gonna be introducing your client. We wanna make sure, okay, we're creating this warm handoff. But as an agency, as a system, this handoff protocol might work for us, but does it work for your client? Does it work for the demographic that you're serving? Does it work for everyone? Is that protocol equitable? Do you have language access as part of it? Do you have a plan? So if your referral process is from one staff member to another staff member, is there another staff member that can take on that referral if that first staff member is gone or is on vacation or maybe, you know, emergencies happening? Having those steps and tiers in that protocol, so that way if one doesn't work, okay, what's that next step? And if this isn't working within that protocol, have that conversation of saying, okay, if these protocols are not working, how are we as a stakeholders, how are we gonna come back to this table? And how are we going to talk about it? How do we want to implement this change later on as well? So having it all documented will help. So that way within each processes, you're going to be able to identify any gaps that might be and where those training issues might happen as well. It's very important that if you start a protocol or collaboration that you do cross training at least within your own staff. So if you're a team of 6, train each 6 individuals on this protocol. So that way every single person is on the same page and it creates that equitable access as well too. So that way, if you're talking to Beatrice, you're gonna get one resource, but maybe if you're talking to Melanie, you're gonna get 2 other resources, right? We wanna make sure we're equitable and everyone is receiving services as well too. And then once that initiates and you've done the training, you're starting the warm handoff protocol, check in and evaluate, talk to your clients, have that follow-up. Hey, I'm gonna refer you to West Valley City Victim Services. I'm gonna give you a call afterwards to see how it's going so we can follow up on like whatever you're working on right here too, right? Because some victims will be dealing with very different programs and it can be really overwhelming. So being willing to say, hey, let me check in on it afterwards. You're letting them know, A, you care about the outcome and you want to talk to them and that it's not a bother. I would always get calls. They're like, oh, I'm so sorry to bother you. So it's just, you're letting them know, no, I want to hear from you. I want to know how this protocol is going. I want to know what doesn't work because I want to hear from you. You're adding value to the victim's voice, to the survivor's voice, and you're also amplifying it all at the same time and validating their experience because their experience might be unique. And it might be that one person, that resource, that warm handoff doesn't work, but for the 12 others, it's working amazingly. That's where you're able to see the data, right? Where you're able to say, okay, it's not working for one, but it's worked for the rest. So maybe we can look back and see if this was just a unique circumstance, right? Personalities, all of that will come into place as well, trauma. So it might not be the referral process itself. It might just be something else too. So we want to honor those spaces, and by documenting it, it'll help you know what's working and not working. And being willing to refine. So after checking in and reviewing, be willing to refine it, fine tune it, and continue to have that ongoing wheel. We always gotta like oil those like hinges and stuff. So it's similar, practical. We have to keep making sure that we're checking in on that and refining it. So that way, again, we're making sure that we're listening to our survivors and we're listening to our clients. But also by doing the work for the one, you're doing the work for the rest too, right? If you're doing the work for one, you're not gonna have to keep calling that agency and saying, oh yeah, what do you do again? What do you do again? If you already have that protocol in place, it'll just streamline services a lot faster as well.
This is the handout.
Fine. Yeah, I was like, that's the handout.
Yeah.
That's okay.
That was the lesson.
Yeah, okay. Okay, threw me off to see the other one again. Sorry. You're good. So with the warm handoff, you'll see out back there, we have it all sectioned out again. So just as a reminder, collaborating with your client, know the resource, and then, let me go to the next slide, because I realize we're out of time. Follow up and refine, and then maintenance. So we see you, we honor you. I love how all these agencies getting to hear from you all today during that breakout session was really fun. But I love to see everyone chatting and talking, so we really are so happy that you guys were able to do that. But also, let us know how we can continue to support you. We really appreciate you all, and if there's any questions, concerns, let us know. Vicki and I are here, especially if you need a debrief. We want to be here for you all. I'm so excited to be in this position because I get it, like, you are all my celebrities. I hope you all know that. I talk about you in my home life, and I'm like, oh, this advocate over here. Like, it's just so exciting because we're all doing the work. We're all in the same space where we're all kind of dealing with a lot of vicarious trauma and burnout. So these collaborations just also remind us that we're not alone in the work, that we are all here to support each other. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
Any other questions? Hopefully the breakout, you guys learned about each other, maybe some new resources that you didn't know about before. But I would definitely just encourage you that lurking and maybe just looking and saying, hey, what's some resources that I've really kind of had a hard time meeting lately, or services? Let's see what I can find. And sometimes too, you can reach out to us too. If you're like, I just don't know what to do on this one. Do you know of a resource? We will research it as well if we're not aware of one, but we just really appreciate all that you guys do, and we are good today. So
You made it. You made it to live.
they let me out 15 minutes early, so we're good.
I thought it was,
You're good.
oh. In my head, I planned an hour from 3:45 to 4:45.
Thank you, Kristen.